Welcome back to another episode of the Injury Report. I'm your host, Dr. John, and my season may be over, but hopefully yours is not. So we're diving into some injuries again this week, as well as a deeper dive into CeeDee Lamb's AC joint injury, which coincidentally, Sam Laporta also suffered an AC joint sprain this past weekend, so we'll be able to explore it from his side of things as well. So getting right into it, Tyreek Hill played through a wrist injury last week. He's still on the injury report being questionable with that wrist injury. Supposedly he tore one of the ligaments in his wrist, but he's still expected to play, which is huge for the Miami Dolphins, as somehow there's someone worse than the Jets and they are last in the AFC East and are looking to spark their season and get going again now that Tua is back, and Tyreek Hill is a major part of that. So plan to see him on the field. Michael Pittman, the wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, was also on the injury report this week with a back injury. He was labeled as a full participant as if he were to practice on Wednesday through walkthroughs, so they're expecting him to play without any injury designation moving forward. T. Higgins just can't seem to catch a break. Initially, he had the hamstring injury right before the start of the season, and now he is dealing with a quad injury that has caused him to miss the last few games. He is still limited. They labeled him as limited for walkthroughs, and he likely needs some form of full participation to play this week, at least feel comfortable playing for fantasy managers to start him. So make sure you keep track of him through the week, because if he is playing, he's definitely a good guy to have on your squad this week. Keon Coleman, the rookie wide receiver for the Bills. A lot of wide receivers this week. I don't know what is going on. He has already been ruled out for this upcoming week with a wrist injury. I don't know what's going on in Buffalo. Maybe it's something in the water or just starting to get colder up there now. But Amari Cooper was also on the injury report with a wrist injury. He is expected to play this week, or at least trending towards playing, barring any setbacks. But Coleman has already been ruled out. Aaron Jones, running back for the Vikings, suffered a rib injury and missed about a quarter of the game last week. He was questionable, and it is unclear yet if he is going to play or not. He's played through a couple of injuries, as well as a hamstring injury that I believe he suffered against the Jets. But he is another one to keep track of this week as we move forward. Nico Collins is back. He has finally come off of IR. He is practicing, and there have been no question marks, no setbacks, so he is expected to play this week, which is very exciting for a Texans team that is in desperate need of some help on offense, where they just can't seem to get things flowing after losing Diggs, Collins earlier in the year, and Tank Dell has not lived up to expectations. So good for the Texans to get him back. I mean, the Texans lost to the Jets. I mean, what else is there to say? They need something. They need a spark. Maybe they need Rodgers. That might help them. I'd be willing to do that. Anyways, I digress. Alrighty. Laporta, like I said, the tight end for the Lions, he suffered a AC joint sprain, and CeeDee Lamb suffered one 2 weeks ago. CeeDee Lamb played through his last week, and while Dallas certainly struggled against Philadelphia, we'll say it was more so the sun that limited CeeDee Lamb and not his shoulder. For those of you that aren't aware or missed it, CeeDee Lamb lost the ball for a pretty easy touchdown in the sun, so against Philly this past week. Don't bring it up to Jerry Jones. He got pretty upset about it. Jerry Jones, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring it up. But the AC joint is short for the acromioclavicular joint, and that joint is right here on the top of your shoulder, where your clavicle or collarbone comes into your acromion process, which is part of your scapula. And this joint is important for a couple of reasons. I believe I've mentioned before how your shoulder is actually made up of multiple joints, but commonly we only think of it moving right here. In reality, your AC joint, your sternoclavicular joint, your SC joint here, and your scapulothoracic joint, as well as this glenohumeral joint, all help to make sure that your shoulder mechanics are correct and you're able to lift that arm overhead and in any other position that you want. Specifically, this AC joint is really, really important for flexion and abduction, so lifting your arms straight up in front and then out to the side. And the reason why is as you go to lift your arm up, that clavicle starts to rotate through that joint to allow for your shoulder to continue to move and clear without any pain or impingement or so on and so forth. So if we look at the joint itself, we got the great big book of everything for the second week in a row. Right here is your AC joint. That's where your clavicle is coming in, and then this acromion process of your scapula connects to it. And over this joint capsule itself, you have the acromioclavicular ligament, and then these two ligaments right here, the conoid and trapezoid ligaments, are what we call corticoclavicular ligaments, or CC ligaments. Those are the three main ligaments that we're going to be looking at today based on the severity of the injury. So there's 6 grades of an AC joint sprain. Very briefly, we're going to go through them all, and you can kind of see there's going to be a pattern. So the first type is where you just have a partial tear or sprain of this AC or acromioclavicular ligament right here at the joint. Type 2 is you have a full tear of this AC ligament and partial tear of one of or both of these CC ligaments. Type 3 is then both of these ligaments, the CC and AC ligaments, are fully torn, and this clavicle then starts to rise up away from the joint because now there's nothing holding that joint in place anymore. That AC ligament is particularly important to keeping that joint stable. Type 4 is where you have a tear of all 3 of these ligaments again, and you have a posterior or backwards displacement of the clavicle relative to the acromion process and the joint. Type 5 is, again, very similar to type 3 actually, where you have a tear through all these ligaments and you have a superior dislocation, or it's starting to drift up, but the magnitude of it is much more severe. So say the clavicle would only displace to about here on a type 3, it's coming up here on a type 5. And the last one, type 6, you have, again, a tear of all 3 ligaments, the joint capsule, and a inferior or downwards dislocation of the clavicle itself. If you're talking about type 4 to 6, you're certainly looking at surgery. And type 3, you're more likely to require surgery based on the fact that all those ligaments and the joint capsule itself is torn and you have that dislocation. Some type 3s are manageable with non-surgical care, but type 1 and type 2 are usually manageable without any surgery. So looking at CeeDee Lamb, for example, since he was able to play through it, it's likely that he has a type 1 to type 2 rather than type 3 or above, where he had a dislocation as well as multiple tears through all of those ligaments and the joint capsule itself. So for his rehab, and Laporta's as well, it's unclear the significance of Laporta's at this time, but looking at the rehab, for something that's non-surgical, you're going to start by working through that pain-free range of motion, whether it's passively first, where you're doing an arm pendulum, where you're just kind of hanging here and you're moving this arm around using your body weight so that none of your muscles are active, and trying to decrease pain that way using heat or ice, things of that nature to try and decrease the pain and improve pain-free range of motion. And then as that range of motion begins to improve, that's where you can start to add in active range of motion, begin to strengthen and restabilize that joint using musculature in a dynamic fashion. For a surgical approach, obviously they're going to have to reduce the clavicle back into the AC joint. And then it's a similar approach from a rehab standpoint after the initial healing stages, where they might be in a sling for several weeks. And then they're certainly going to start with passive range of motion and then make their way up through that timeline of like active assisted to active to then strengthening and neuromuscular re-education of mechanics and so on and so forth until they're able to return to sport. That's why this injury can be particularly aggravating for a wide receiver or a tight end, where you're constantly trying to block or lift your arms overhead and catch a ball, and then also you're being tackled, and it's very easy to land on that shoulder, which would then continue to aggravate those ligaments in that joint. But that's kind of a quick rundown on an AC joint injury. When you're looking at that timeline of recovery, obviously types 4 through 6, anything that requires surgery is going to have a much longer timeline of recovery. But for type 1 and type 2, you're looking at a couple of weeks, especially for type 1, a couple of weeks of improving that range of motion, decreasing the pain, and then able to strengthen and get back to full activity. Typically, you're looking around a 6-week mark is kind of that sweet spot, since ligaments take a little bit longer to heal, just because they don't have as much blood supply as muscles, for example. But depending on the severity, it goes up from there. Oh, and I don't think I did one last week, so I'll give one now. Jets update, season's over. Aaron Rodgers probably won't retire. think he said he won't. I wish he would. The Jets are the Jets. I don't know what Joe Namath did, but he must have sold like the next 100 years of possibly good football for the Jets for that Super Bowl win. Yeah. It's college basketball season, folks. Yeah. Thank you guys for joining me, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, make sure you put them down below. Thank you for watching and clicking that bell. I'll see you guys in the next one.